Okay, just a little video on the inking. I'm using here a curve ruler tool to draw out a sort of shape for this part of a building. My Studio's rulers are a great way of drawing sort of organic shapes. We can then draw any kind of line using any kind of pen tool just in the parts of the drawing that you want that ruler to apply. And holding the command key on the Mac, you can then sort of drag and drop that ruler as you need to. You can also move points on the ruler and change it as is necessary. Um, and I sort of, with this, I've used this ruler non-stop for this particular panel just to draw various lines. And because you're sort of using the guiding ruler and using whatever pen tool you want, you can use in the same pen tool, you can get thinner and thicker lines, and just by moving the ruler that you've got, you can then create sort of lots of different shapes and lots of different lines. I'll go through very quickly and do that with this bit. So just creating a nice big organic shape and drawing on the lines where I think it would apply. I'm using the turnip pen, which is quite a sort of hard pen. It doesn't vary a great deal in weight. It's quite thin, and I'm drawing this big sort of organic shape here. This is speeded up a fair amount, so I actually do this slightly more methodically than it might appear here. But you can see there, I'm still using the pen there and just using the command and the mouse button or the Wacom Cintiq nib to sort of tap and move things. And you see here I'm sort of moving this shape around to get sort of other lines on within the shape, and then just using the turnip pen just more lightly than to get thinner lines there. And I'll kind of build these future buildings up with lots and lots of shapes. There's always the danger when you're doing something like this that you can kill the life out of some inking by doing this, and that would be my worry. But with this, it's a non-organic shape, so it doesn't really matter too much. I kind of find with organic shapes, you want a lot of more randomness. You want to add in, if these were a tree, for example, you wouldn't really want to use any ruled lines at all, no matter how kind of curved they might appear to be. And draw some inner lines within this, just to give this building a wee bit of form. Again, I'm sort of not really going back to the tool menu at all. I'm just holding the command key and the pen to move these lines. The danger is that you might sometimes miss the line and actually click on the page and find yourself moving the whole page, but you can quickly undo and move on. I'm concentrating on the robot here. I kind of went in and inked this robot over the process of inking the whole page, but I've kind of compressed them all into one. So I'm starting off with a circular ruler, and you can see it's got multiple points on it for changing the shape of that, but it's also got those various tools for kind of distorting it. So I'm sort of going to use them to tilt it and distort the circle, the same circle, basically, to draw every single circle that is on this, or every single circular curved shape that's on this robot, which is a massive step up from how it would have been done in the old Manga Studio, where it sometimes would have been easier just to draw multiple circle rulers and then concentrate on those, concentrate and ink in those. You can see it's because of the tools, the sort of the ability to change the shape of that, it becomes very flexible, that circular ruler. That lighter blue button at the top of that sort of marquee allows you to tilt it. So you're never at a point where you've kind of drawn the wrong shape. You can always kind of tilt the angle of it and do various things. So we're cutting, I've done slightly more inking, and now I'm going back in and inking more of this robot. also known as Daddy Wins the Race. This thing's going to be mostly in shadow. I'll flip it upside down, have a look at it, tilt the angles of the whole page, and just make sure. Some lines I find easier just to draw at a 45-degree angle, even though they're strictly speaking straight lines. Just using the fill tool to fill this all in. One thing I would point out, Manga Studio has various anti-aliasing options on all of its tools, and seems to default to setting them to small anti-alias option. I would turn all the anti-aliasing off, because when you're doing a flood fill, although Manga Studio's flood fill is quite smart and will actually fill in underneath some anti-alias strokes, but it's far better to have a kind of hard edge line when you're doing that. So now we'll draw a curve ruler again for the robot shoulder. And we'll use that same shape to draw the other side. Shrink it down a little bit for perspective. Moving it out of the way there so that I don't accidentally get caught into using it when I'm trying to draw another shape. If I'd left it in there, it would have been hard to draw lines kind of close to it. A little bit of feathering. Oop, I filled the wrong area there. Just turn off layers just to see how it looks so far. I'm sort of setting the panel borders to be about 50% see-through. That way I can tell whether, because the panels are on a layer above everything else, often when you flood fill, you'll accidentally flood fill more of a page than you intend to, because you haven't remembered that the panel that you see there is actually not part of the drawing that you're flood filling. So if I set the panel borders to 50%, I can always tell that panel border is a grey and that the actual artwork isn't part of it. And so I can then just sort of draw the artwork where I feel it needs to be. Chipping away on this robot, drawing in kind of made up details. It's difficult when you're designing on a page. You kind of think you think of nice little design moments and they look neat, and then you kind of have to turn it 30 degrees because you're drawn at a different angle on a different panel, and you realize that the thing you've drawn doesn't quite work. So my advice is design before you don't design on the page, or if you're going to design on the page, do it better than I do sometimes. Just check to see how that looks. I like the kind of heavy shadow in there. It's quite a dominant sort of image. Having a little difficulty with the pen though. You can see the Cintiq is sometimes flicking up. I find sometimes it'll do that when the nib is dirty, and it can be cleaned basically by taking the nib out of the Cintiq and blowing hard into the little hole where the Cintiq nib is, and that will usually kind of clear it out of anything that's causing it to stick. Sometimes a reboot will have to do as well, because sometimes it isn't something like that. It's a bit of software being a bit funny. Manga Studio has on the navigator, there's zoom in and zoom out, which is you'd expect, but there's also a kind of flip horizontal and flip vertical, so you can very quickly see how it would look at different, how it would look the other way around, and correct things, and some things are easier to draw from the other side. I think we all have a sort of fundamental left-right bias when we're drawing stuff, and some lines are easier. I kind of find a lot of lines are easier if I'm pulling the line towards my body, if I'm pulling the pen towards me. And so it's sometimes easier to flip something through 90 degrees, because you can also flip the angle of the page then. And you can see there I'm drawing underneath the panel border to make sure that the flood fill stays within where I expect it to be. (150 zoom, which is what this is a bit nuts. There's no real need for it because people won't generally see that much detail. And you can tell there I've gone, nope, that's too detailed. I'm going to make that a solid black so it still reads from a distance. There you go. And drawn more of the arm in. There's a nice sort of, the shape of it, it's sort of what you expect a modern robot to look like, really. It's not terribly futuristic, but that's cool. It's like a big webcam on something. I'm putting some detail here in white and it doesn't really work, so I should take that out. I have my Cintiq pen is mapped with the two buttons on the Cintiq pen that I have. One of those buttons is mapped with the spacebar, which means then, and here's a great tip, it means if I want to move the page around, I can just press that button, that turns it to the spacebar, which turns the whole thing to hand, so I can just move the page around from, just using the Cintiq. And especially if you've got a smaller Cintiq, as I have a 12-inch Cintiq, you find yourself kind of running out of space all the time, so you're constantly moving that image around on screen. The other button on the Cintiq I've mapped to the Control Z for undo, because I find that with digital drawing there seems to be an awful lot of times where you draw a line, you think nope, that's not right, and you undo, and you're undoing all the time. So it's just made it a lot easier just to have that undo constantly to hand. As Jack Kirby once famously said, every time I erase a line it costs me money. I think the same is true of the undo. Every time you undo something it's costing you money when you're working. Lots of nice solid blacks. I kind of want a nice, this is a figure in a heavy foreground. You want to separate your foreground, middle ground, and distance. And these heavy blacks will help separate this from this. It'll push it really into the fore, while at the same time keeping it quite subdued because there's so much black there. At this point I think I've kind of realised that this robot might be better on its own panel, which means I can actually move the whole thing, as I will do. So I create a new layer with just that part of the drawing. I kind of move it over here, shift it over slightly so it's much further over it, which gives me a big gap between the two characters, which allows me then, it gives me a lot more space for lettering. So we've done that, and what I'm going to do now is ink in this night sky. I'm selecting, using the Magic Wand tool, I've selected the space in the sky, but the important thing is Mega Studio lets you select layers that aren't the layer you're working on, so I'm actually using the Magic Wand tool to select the layer. I've got a new layer called Stars, which is just blank, and then I'm using the Magic Wand to select the drawing, the clear area of the drawing below that. And then I'm using here a pen that I've set up called a spray pen, which is basically a scan of some splattered ink. And because it's a nice random shape, and because when it sprays out the ink, it'll vary the size of those splatters depending on the pressure on the pen. You can get lovely sort of organic ink shapes, inky splattery shapes. It'll actually, it randomly places the angle of the splatter, and it'll kind of change the size depending on the pressure. So you get great kind of repetitive but interesting different patterns. And then as I do here, you can draw then your own little Milky Way. And filling in some of the Milky Way within the background of that. I'm just assuming that in the far future air pollution won't be a problem. So now we've finally inked the full thing. I'm going to add a kind of tone which would have been called in the US would have been called zipatone, and letratone in the UK. And I sort of select a nice big chunky one, and I drag and drop that onto the page. You'll see that's currently below the panel border layer, and everything now has got that tone on it. But I can easily I can select all and delete that. And now to apply the tone, I basically just draw on the page with any of the drawing tools, and they will work in any way. So you can see I'm sort of drawing areas where I think shadow, or rather areas that I want to give a wee bit of form to. And again, because you can use any drawing tool, you can actually use a pen to use a drawing tool and then fill it, and that area then is filled with the tone. You can actually go in later on and change the tone too if you find that the tone is the wrong type of tone. If it's not heavy enough, or if it's if it's too heavy, you can go and actually change the style of tone very easily. Something that you can do in Photoshop, you could create a tone layer, or you could import a tone layer and use that, but you wouldn't be able to just edit it just as handily, I don't think. So again, I'm just sort of using the tone to kind of differentiate and set the shape of various things, make it a little visually a wee bit more interesting. In this sort of high-tech Vegas world, or whatever it is. Just selecting an area and then with the lasso and then filling it. That sort of applies the tone to that area that you filled. There's a little bit of a moire effect. You'll probably see that on the video. That's purely down to the resolution of the video, the screen resolution. You'll often get that whenever you're, once you've used a bit of tone like this, if you export it as a JPEG and you export it quite small, that moire effect will really kind of jump to the fore. So it's important to kind of realize that that's not going to happen at print resolution. It should be fine. You should see dots. They should look a bit like that up close. I love tone because it feels like comics to me. It's how comics used to be made. Tone would have been either scraped down, or I think it could be used like a transparent script onto a page. Also, you can use it with. You used to be able to get sticky sheets of paper. You would cut out the sticky sheet and it would stick itself self-adhesively stick onto the page. And if you ever see any old original comic art, you'll sometimes see that yellowing or coming off. So again, I'm basically using this to I'll take that robot and push it further into silhouette by adding a bit of shading to it. And I've kind of filled too much of it, and you want it to be slightly see-through. I'm not sure why he's got a light on the back of his head, but he has, so you know. I've kind of added a wee bit more shading into the this is sort of help differentiate that mirror. But of course it then blends a little with the robot, so I'm going to then scrape away some of that colouring, or some of that shading in a minute. Just a little bit shading around the old guy's face, and we'll put even more dark silhouette on our mysterious new robot guy, who at this point could be anything really. I've called him new robot, but I've drawn him such that he could be man or beast, superhero, robot, alien, god, who knows. Sort of haphazardly cutting and fill in underneath the panel borders, but because the panel border is made up of white and black and see-through, transparent, obviously the white takes precedence and you don't see it. You'll have to forgive if you hear any coughing on either of these videos. You'll have to forgive me, I'm running a bit of a fever. So I'm sort of chipping away a wee bit of the white on the robot to give it a wee bit of a highlight. And basically to separate it from the tone within that mirror. It's all about readability for me. It's all about making sure that a reader can see what it is they're looking at and can quickly read, not just sort of can skim read and still get all the information they might need out of it. I mean, it's a pet peeve of mine, or it's a pet hate of mine, the complexity of a panel, and I mean, you can play with how fast a reader reads something by adding more and less details, but I like a reader to be able to see what it is they're getting straight away without having to try and figure out what it is, unless that's the thing you want them to do. And there we go. I think with most of the tone in that, I think we can say call that page done. And a handful of layers, not too many.